ranking the 2022 F1 drivers after the 2022 season. After every race weekend, I rated each driver and gave them a point from 1 to 10. I then counted up all the points to get a ranking. I will start in P20 and make my way up to P1. I compared my ratings to some other websites and F1 Power Rankings, and the season average was pretty similar with less than 1 point difference, so I think my rankings is pretty accurate. But without wasting any more time, let's get into it. So in P20 we have Nicholas Latifi. He got 2 points. His best race was the Japanese Grand Prix where he scored both those points, and his worst race is the Italian Grand Prix where Nick de Vries outqualified him and he started the race in P10, finishing in P15 after 4 drivers retired. He got a season rating of 4.4. In P19 we have Daniel Ricciardo. He scored 37 points. I think we can all agree that if I said this a few years ago, you would think I'm crazy, but sadly Daniel Ricciardo's time at McLaren wasn't a big success. His best race of the season was the Singapore Grand Prix where he started in P16 and made his way up to P5. He also did very good in the Mexican Grand Prix, and his worst race, I would have to say, the US Grand Prix. He just didn't have any pace. He got a season rating of 5.8. The next driver on this list is Yuki Tsunoda. He didn't have a good season, but he will have another chance to prove himself next year. His best race of the season was Imola. He finished in P6, scoring 6 of his 12 points. His worst race must have been the Canadian Grand Prix, where it looked good. He might score some points, but he had a crash coming out of the pit lane, just braking way too late. I just want to make it clear, when I'm talking about his worst and best race, I don't necessarily mean finishing position. He gets a 6 rating. Moving on to P17, we have Mick Schumacher. He also scored 12 points. I really like him and I think most of us want him to do good, but this season he had a lot of mistakes and bad luck. Abu Dhabi was a good example of this, where he was running in a good position, but he made a mistake and ran into the back of Latifi. His best race must have been the Austrian Grand Prix, where he had some great pace, finishing in P6, scoring 8 points in the Haas. And his worst race is the Monaco Grand Prix. He was pretty slow and then had a big crash, but I still would have wanted to see him in F1 next season. He got a season rating of 6.1. Going to P16, we have Lance Stroll. He scored 18 points. His best race is the Singapore Grand Prix, where he finished in P8 in wet conditions. We know Stroll is good in the rain, and the worst race is the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. His teammate Sebastian Vettel showed that the car was great there, but Stroll just didn't have any pace. He gets a season rating of 6.3. Guanyu Zhou finished in P15. He had a good season, considering it's his first season in F1. His best race was the Canadian Grand Prix, and his worst race was the Miami Grand Prix. It wasn't terrible, but he got a season rating of 6.4. He scored 6 points. In P14, we have Kevin Magnussen. He scored 25 points and a pole position. He had a very strong first half of the season, and also considering he wasn't even planning on making a return to F1 this season, he did really good. His best race was the Bahrain Grand Prix, where he had an incredible performance and finished in P5, and his worst race was the Italian Grand Prix. He gets a rating of 6.5. In P13, we have Pierre. He scored 23 points. It's a bit of a shock since last year he was one of the best drivers on the grid, but he was struggling with the car this season. His best race was the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and his worst race was the Austrian Grand Prix. His season rating is a 6.6. Alex Albon finished in P12. He scored 4 points, also a pretty good season for him since it's his first season back and he had outperformed his teammate most of the time. His best race of the season was the Australian Grand Prix, where he did a different strategy and had the pace to do it, and his worst race was the Spanish Grand Prix, but it wasn't really that bad. He got a season rating of 6.7. In P11, we have Valtteri Bottas. He scored 49 points. He had an insane good first half of the season, but the car didn't improve as much as the other teams, but he still got the points when it was available. His best performance was Imola, and his worst performance was the US Grand Prix. He got a rating of 6.8. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. It will only take a second, and you can always unsubscribe later. But going to P10, we have the 35-year-old German driver, Sebastian Vettel. His best race was the Japanese Grand Prix, but we should have expected that, and his worst Grand Prix was the Australian Grand Prix. It was his first weekend back from COVID, so it's probably what happened. His season rating is a 6.9. In 9th place, we have Esteban Ocon. He had 2 great performances in Austria and in Japan, but I will say Japan is the best race since he held back a 7-time world champion on a very slippery track. His worst performance was in Imola, but it wasn't a bad race. He scored 92 points and got a season rating of 7.3. Moving on to P8, we have Carlos Sainz. He made a few mistakes this season, but it was really good, and I think next season he will be even faster, but this is the 2022 ratings, so let's look at his best race, and I have to say it's the French Grand Prix, where he started from the back and fought his way up, and his worst race was the Australian Grand Prix. He got a score of 7.5. He scored 246 points, 9 podiums, 2 pole positions and a victory. Lando Norris finished in P7. He also had a good season, but I'm sure we all want to see him battling for podiums or even wins. His best race of the season was the Imola Grand Prix, where he got a podium, and his worst race was probably the Bahrain Grand Prix. He got 7.6 rating and scored 122 points and a podium. In P6 we have Sergio Perez. He scored 305 points, 11 podiums, 2 wins and a pole position. He had a good season, almost getting Red Bull their first 1-2 ever in a championship. His best race was Monaco, where he took control and made the right calls at the right times. And his worst race was the Italian Grand Prix, but like most of these guys, it wasn't a terrible race. He gets a 7.7. P4 and 5 is Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton, and they were separated by less than 0.03 rating points. But Fernando Alonso finished in P5. He had a lot of bad luck in the first half of the season, but he was the second highest rated driver for the second part of the season. His best race was the Brazilian Grand Prix, and his worst race was the Bahrain Grand Prix. He got a rating of 7.8. Fernando Alonso scored 81 points. In P4 we have Lewis Hamilton. Also had a good season. His best race of the season was the US Grand Prix, and his worst race was in Imola. He also got a rating of 7.8. He scored 240 points and 9 podiums. George Russell finished in P3. He had an insanely good first season in Mercedes, finishing in P4 in the standings. He scored 275 points, 9 podiums, 1 win and 1 pole. His best race was the Brazilian Grand Prix, where he didn't make a single mistake, and his worst race was the Singapore Grand Prix. He gets a season rating of 8. In P2 we have Charles Leclerc. He also had a great season, but Ferrari didn't make it easy for him. His best race was the Bahrain Grand Prix, and his worst race was probably Imola. He scored 308 points, 11 podiums, 3 wins and 9 pole positions. He got a season rating of 8.4. And now the highest rated driver of the 2022 season, we have Max Verstappen. He was in a league of his own, scoring 454 points, 17 podiums, 15 wins and 7 pole positions. It's hard to pick his best race, but I will have to say it's probably Belgium, and his worst race was the Brazilian Grand Prix. He got an insane rating of 9.2. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.